The history of tattoos is one of the oldest human stories, stretching back thousands of years and reaching across nearly every corner of the world. It is not just the story of ink on skin, but the story of how people have always tried to hold on to something permanent in a life that is constantly changing. Long before tattoos became a fashion statement seen on red carpets or displayed in modern studios, they carried weight and meaning that went far beyond appearance. They were used for healing, for protection, for belief, and as a clear marker of identity. In many societies, a tattoo was not a casual decision. It was something earned, something endured, and something that defined a person's place in the world. The earliest known chapter of this story begins with a man frozen in time, Ötzi the Iceman. He lived more than 5,000 years ago, moving through a harsh and unforgiving alpine environment where survival depended on endurance and adaptability. When his body was discovered, preserved almost perfectly by ice, it gave researchers a rare window into the life of someone from a distant past. Alongside his tools and clothing, one detail stood out above all others: his tattoos. There were 61 of them, scattered across his body. They were not elaborate or decorative in any modern sense. There were no animals, no symbols of status, no visible attempt at artistic expression. Instead, they were simple lines and dots, carefully arranged in specific locations. At first glance, they seemed almost insignificant, as if they carried no meaning at all. But as scientists studied them more closely, a pattern began to emerge. Each tattoo aligned with areas of his body that showed signs of damage: his joints, his spine, his lower back. These were the places where his body had endured strain over time, where pain would have been constant. This discovery led to a compelling theory, that these tattoos were a form of treatment. In a world without formal medicine, without written knowledge of anatomy, these markings may have served as a primitive form of pain relief. Many researchers compare them to acupuncture, suggesting that the placement of these marks was not random, but intentional. For Ötzi, these tattoos were not meant to be seen by others. They were not symbols of identity or beauty. They were practical. They were functional. They were a way to manage pain and continue living in an environment where even small injuries could become life-threatening. In this sense, the earliest tattoos were not about expression. They were about survival. Around the same period, in ancient Egypt, tattooing developed in a very different direction. Here, tattoos were not primarily linked to physical healing, but to protection and spiritual belief. For a long time, historians assumed that tattoos in Egypt were limited to outsiders or lower classes. But more recent discoveries have changed that understanding. Evidence now shows that many women, including priestesses and respected members of society, wore tattoos as part of their cultural and spiritual identity. These tattoos were often subtle, small, repeating patterns placed on the stomach, thighs, and chest. Their placement was not random. These areas were closely associated with fertility, pregnancy, and childbirth. In the ancient world, childbirth was one of the most dangerous experiences a woman could face. There were no guarantees of survival, and complications were common. In this context, tattoos became more than decoration. They became protection. Many of these designs were connected to Bes, a protective deity associated with motherhood, childbirth, and the safety of both mother and child. By marking their bodies with these symbols, women carried protection with them at all times. Unlike charms or objects that could be lost or taken away, these markings were permanent. They were always present, always close, always part of the body itself. These tattoos reflected a deep belief that what was placed on the skin could influence what happened within the body. They were a form of silent prayer, one that stayed with the person through every moment of uncertainty. As tattooing spread across different parts of the world, it reached one of its most complex and meaningful forms in the Pacific Islands. In places such as Samoa and New Zealand, tattooing was not simply practiced, it was central to identity and culture. The word tattoo itself comes from the Tahitian word tatau, which reflects the sound of the tools used in the process. This sound, steady, rhythmic tapping, was part of the experience, part of the ritual. The process was slow and physically demanding. Tools made from bone, wood, and natural materials were used to carve patterns into the skin. Unlike modern tattooing, which injects ink beneath the surface, these traditional methods often involved cutting into the skin, creating deeper and more permanent markings. The pain was significant, and the process could take a long time to complete. But the pain was not seen as a negative aspect. It was part of the meaning. For the Maori people, tattooing, known as moko, was deeply tied to identity. Facial tattoos were especially significant. They were not chosen randomly or based on personal preference. Each pattern was carefully designed to reflect a person's lineage, achievements, and social standing. In a society without written records in the modern sense, these tattoos served as a visible form of identity. They communicated information instantly: who a person was, where they came from, and what they had accomplished. The process of receiving these tattoos was just as important as the final result. Enduring the pain demonstrated strength, discipline, and commitment. It showed that a person was ready to take their place within the community. A person without tattoos could be seen as lacking identity or status, as though their story had not yet been written. In this way, tattoos were not just something you had, they were something you became. In Europe, tattooing followed a different path. For many centuries, it declined, largely due to religious beliefs that discouraged marking the body. Tattoos were often viewed as unnecessary or even inappropriate, and the practice gradually faded from mainstream culture. However, it did not disappear completely. It remained present in certain groups, waiting to re-emerge. That re-emergence came during the Age of Exploration in the 1700s. As European sailors traveled across the world, they encountered cultures where tattooing was widely practiced and deeply respected. These encounters had a lasting impact. Sailors began to adopt the practice, bringing it back with them across oceans. For sailors, tattoos became a way to record their journeys and experiences. Each design carried meaning. An anchor symbolized crossing the Atlantic Ocean. A turtle represented crossing the equator. Swallows often indicated long-distance travel and the hope of returning home safely. These tattoos served as personal records in a time when travel was dangerous and unpredictable. But tattoos also carried another layer of meaning: belief. The sea was one of the most dangerous environments a person could face. Storms, shipwrecks, and uncertainty were constant. In such conditions, sailors relied on superstition as much as skill. Tattoos became a form of protection. Words like "hold fast" were inked across knuckles to help maintain grip during storms. Images of pigs and roosters were believed to prevent drowning, based on the idea that these animals often survived shipwrecks. Whether or not these beliefs were true was less important than the sense of security they provided. In a world where control was limited, belief itself became a form of strength. For most of history, tattooing remained slow, manual, and deeply rooted in tradition. That changed in 1891 when Samuel O'Reilly created the first electric tattoo machine, adapting an earlier invention by Thomas Edison. This innovation transformed tattooing completely. What once required long hours of manual work could now be done faster and with greater precision. Artists could create cleaner lines, more detailed designs, and more consistent results. This shift allowed tattooing to expand rapidly. It moved from a practice tied to specific cultures and groups into something more widely accessible. In the United States, this period marked the beginning of what is often called the golden age of tattooing. The style that emerged during this time, known as traditional or old school, was defined by bold outlines, strong colors, and iconic imagery such as roses, eagles, and anchors. These designs were practical. They were created to last, to remain visible over time, and to hold their shape even as the skin aged. They became especially popular among soldiers and sailors, particularly during World War I and World War II. As these individuals traveled and returned home, they carried tattoo culture with them, spreading it further into mainstream awareness. Despite this growth, tattoos were not always widely accepted. Throughout much of the 20th century, they were often associated with rebellion, toughness, and those who lived outside traditional social norms. They were seen as markers of defiance rather than expression. But culture does not remain fixed, and over time, perceptions began to change. Starting in the 1970s and 80s, a new generation of artists entered the field. Many came from backgrounds in fine art, bringing new techniques and perspectives. They began to treat tattooing not just as a craft, but as an art form. Skin became a canvas, and the possibilities expanded. New styles emerged: highly detailed realism, large-scale Japanese-inspired designs, abstract compositions, and more. Tattoo studios became more professional, and the quality of work improved significantly. As the art evolved, so did public perception. Tattoos began to move from the margins of society into the mainstream. What was once hidden became visible. What was once judged became accepted. Today, tattoos can be found in every part of life. They are worn by people across different professions, cultures, and generations. They no longer belong to a single group or identity. Instead, they have become a widely accepted form of personal expression. And yet, despite all these changes, the evolution of tools, styles, and cultural acceptance, the core reason behind tattoos has remained the same. From the time of Ötzi the Iceman to the present day, tattoos have always been about meaning. They allow people to hold on to memories, express beliefs, and define who they are in a permanent way. In a life where so much changes and eventually fades, a tattoo remains. It becomes part of the body, part of the story, part of the identity. It is not just something that is seen, it is something that is carried. And in that way, tattoos are more than history. They are a reflection of something deeply human, the need to leave a mark that does not disappear.
You've been watching Yesterday Explained. Like, comment, and share for more. Bye for now.